Good morning. How are you?
Good, thanks. Yourself?
Me too. 70% sleep. It's enough. I don't sleep good. So 70% is good. Okay, so I will give a nice little talk today. As you know, I speak slow, but it's not because I'm stupid. I am Irish. So let's begin with early work. On the left, it's a picture from 1967. I was 17. I was working as a graphic designer, and something's very interesting in this little painting for me that I noticed later. At the top of the painting is a sign. It says, "Artist's Agent." And this is from the time when illustrators had agents. Different system to now, because now we have photographs. But there were illustrators, many illustrators in the 60s. So I think that sign is like an angel in the sky, very high up. It's symbolic of my hope for the future. This is before I went to art school. I was working as a graphic designer and a delivery boy, and before that I worked as a typesetter with lead, monotype, in a factory. Because I started work when I was 15, and nobody in my family had ever gone to university before, and nobody even discussed it as a thing. So I had to work in a factory and then work in an office, and gradually, little by little, I got into an art school for people without qualifications. Now, the one on the right is made from the influence of a trip to Morocco, which is later, after I'd gone to college. I was in Newcastle, my second art school. Well, that was university. But I went to Morocco and I loved all the carpets and the way the carpets were made. I was very interested in this because when I was a boy, my mother taught me to knit and to make, what is it called? Macrame, I think. When you make a tube, it comes out as a tube. You push it through like this with nails, and it comes, you pull it, and you make a tube of wool, and then you can make little placemats for the table like this. This is what I did when I was a boy. And these things are meant to be girl things, so I did both. You know, I did these feminine things and then also lots of fighting. And so this idea of knitting has been with me very strong all my life. And you can see it in my paintings. They're influenced by carpets and art where you don't show the face of God. So this had a big influence on me, and it also looks like a primitive loom, like a Paleolithic loom. Now, next. Oops. Next. There's something missing in the story, which is my work was realistic early on. But then one day I discovered the freedom of color and abstraction and how to abstract figures and put them in space. And then I was absolutely in love with color and color compositions and making figures that were part of their environment. There wasn't a separation between the human being and the environment, or this separation was becoming smaller. And these were made in 68, maybe. And I made paintings like this, and I worked like this for quite a long time. But this precedes the trip to Morocco. So we got the stuff in the wrong order. So this one on the right was made after Morocco in 68, and this one before. So, you know, we went to Morocco to save the world because we were hippies. And then when I came back from Morocco, I started to make paintings very much like this, very influenced by textiles and art from Asia, which you will know because we are in Asia. And you know, these are based on repetition, very devotional art, actually, where you visit something again and again and you weave it, and it's quite Zen already. Then the one coming up now is after, sorry, I was still in the UK when I made these, and you can see they're quite jolly, happy. Then I go to New York. Yeah, right. So my father, who was a barber, said to me, when in Rome, do as the Romans. And I never forgot, because I'm basically a professional immigrant. I was an immigrant to the UK, and then I was an immigrant again to the US. And I believe very strongly that the immigrant has to integrate, not the culture has to assimilate the immigrant. I think it's the responsibility of the immigrant to assimilate. And if I lived in Korea, I would learn Korean. When I lived in Spain, I learned Spanish. And when I lived in Germany, I learned not bad German. Not the best, but not bad. And I assimilated. So this assimilates into the dominant art form of the day, which was minimalism. And there was also color field, which was a more decorative art form. But I preferred this because, in a way, I was on a kind of religious mission to integrate myself into New York, into the rigor of New York, and then break it. So this is made quite systematically. They're very beautiful colors from the night. They go from dark to grey, and the lines are two colors on one panel, making a kind of vibration. It's extreme, even though it is very rigorous, it is quite poetic because it's a nocturnal painting, which attests to my nature that even though I was making minimal work, they were still romantic because they were based on nocturnal light. Now, this is when I start to have enough of minimalism. And then I think after 5 years of making black and grey Zen-like paintings, I decide that minimalism has to come to an end. And somebody has to do it. And then I thought, well, it may as well be me. Because I was from Europe, so I had the American toolbox and the European toolbox. And I got a bigger bag and put all my tools in one bag. That's a metaphor. And then I was able to do these other things. So they become compositional, referring to a window, a carpet, maybe a floor, and the color gets really interesting, and there's texture in the painting. Some of the areas are painted differently to others. You can see it anyway, you can see it in the exhibition. So I start to paint over colors, leaving information, and the paintings become more visual, more vibrant, less dogmatic, more experiential. And this painting takes a title from Beckett. It's called Come and Go. Beautiful title. Anyway, so then I'm starting to get a little bit independent from minimalism and getting ready to make this. And this is my announcement painting called Backs and Fronts. So even by calling it Backs and Fronts, I break another minimalist rule, which is to use a metaphor. Because minimalism is based basically on reduction and tautology. This paint is like this because it's painted on this surface. That's a minimal argument, taking out all human feeling. Now I start putting it back, and this painting was very sensational in New York. when it was first shown. And it's based on the idea of the city and the skyline and also people. That's why I call it backs and fronts, like people, figures in a line. I start to think of abstraction figuratively and metaphorically and relationally, because people who were involved in minimalism were so proud to say that their paintings were non-relational painting. Absolute painting. It was called absolute painting. And there were exhibitions in New York called absolute painting, which in my view eventually became absolutely boring. So I had to do something, and this was it. And this caused an immense amount of confusion, but also fascination. And plus, there's no rule to the color anymore. There's no logic to the expanding and contracting lines. Even though it's structural, it's like a portrait of the city. What's interesting also about Manhattan, I don't know if any of you have noticed, when you go to Manhattan, there's no space between the buildings. All the buildings are pressed up against the other buildings. So the lack of space causes human beings to be combative and in constant negotiation. They call it the most transactional city in the world. And it's got something to do with the way it's built. And I always believe that architecture is a portrait of the culture. Every culture makes different architecture, and that architecture says something about the psychology of the culture. And New York is a city of collision and hard-made relationships. It's a very aggressive city. So that's the painting that changed the direction of abstract painting in the early 80s. And this is a painting that is a strange painting. It's in the exhibition, and it's a dedication to a friend of mine, my first patron in New York, who was actually very poor, but he had enough money to buy my drawings sometimes. And when I was making all these paintings, I was poor. And I was working on building sites. So I made this painting, and it seems to be two figures in a strange background, one more vibrant than the other, and one is diagonal and dark, destabilizing the painting. It's as if these two figures are calling to each other across this background. At this point, late 80s, early 90s, I start including the window. And the window causes the painting to be dialectic instead of tautologous, which is what I described when I talked about minimalism. Minimalism was always a tautology. And once you start rebuilding relationships and inserts and collisions and diptychs and triptychs, you start complicating where the center is and where the harmony is. And I was quite happy to create disharmony and of course a certain sense of beauty, but the beauty that I was involved with was one that I hadn't seen before. So you can see this as a figure, you can see it as a window, or you can see it as an argument or a structure inserted into another structure. So they became the paintings became very much about these dialogues between outside and inside, framing, protecting, or incarcerating. So they're quite philosophical in that sense. They were mostly called passenger. So as if a big body was supporting a small body. These floating paintings were made at a time when the position of painting itself was very fragile. And in many museums, people were discussing the possibility of taking rooms in museums that were painting rooms, taking away the paintings and dedicating the rooms to photography and installation art, but particularly photography. And I think, looking back, this affected me, and I made the painting as if it was losing its position in the culture. So its position was flat, secure on the wall, and then it became insecure and it turned out like this. And it was only connected to the wall by one thin edge. And they are, of course, moving out towards sculpture. So they're not paintings and they're not sculptures. There's something in between. And I also loved the idea that inside that box, you had space that you couldn't see, and you could fill it up with, if you wanted to, you could fill it up with love letters. And the other thing that they engage, which is very interesting to me, since I'm an abstract painter, primarily, sometimes, most of the time, you engage your memory. When you look at one side of the painting, you walk round, and you look at the other side of the painting, you're engaged in memory. And of course, you know, since we're not fish, and we have a longer memory than 12 seconds, it's working out usually. But it's interesting to me that one side is usually different to the other side. The bands are in a different order, so this makes you walk around, makes it environmental. This is in the exhibition. It's made from pieces, and I wanted to say, when I was talking about those floating paintings, that I had a discussion once with a very nice curator in France who said that abstract painting is the art of the glimpse being the short look, that it goes into your brain in 2 seconds. And people apparently look at paintings for 2 seconds. And I find that very interesting because we are still in development and we know apparently much more than we know, or much more than we think we know, and our ability to take in information rapidly is exercised by abstract painting, particularly because it doesn't have figures in it. They don't have to think about recognition, where this is and where that is, and so on and so on. And I once saw an exhibition with some friends of mine in the Museum of Modern Art, and it was an exhibition of photographs of places and post-impressionist paintings of those places. And instead of it being an art experience, it was a detective experience, because people were saying, oh, look at that tower. And then they would say, oh yeah, look, it's in the photograph. Wow. And the street, that street is, oh yeah, I can see it in the painting. So they weren't looking at the paintings or the photographs, they were just looking at a kind of puzzle. A kind of, yeah, it was like a puzzle. So you had to find what was in the photograph and where it was in the painting. And this, I don't think, has much to do with my idea of art. So with an abstract painting, you can't play that game because it's an instant image. And in my case in particular, it is an instant image that is then extremely complicated in the way it's painted. And that it was the difference between me and most of my contemporaries in New York. And it was the fact that I came from Europe. So this is a misfitting painting of relationship. Jean-Paul Sartre, by the way, describes this as hell. 3 people in a relationship going, it's his description of hell. This little painting, which I'm very fond of, is part of a series called Doric, I believe, which is a love letter to Athens and Greece and the idea of harmony and classicism and the freedom to think and ask questions. And that's the origin of what I would argue is democracy, what we have today. So I made all these paintings based on 3. And the bigger ones, which are not here, but I will tell you about anyway, are triptychs based on 2 to 3, like the floor of a Greek temple. And the Doric is the first order. Doric, Ionic, Corinthian. And Doric is the primary order, the simple one. And I very much love the idea of a platform with walls implied by columns that are not filled in. And I love the idea of the air passing through this place where ideas are born and discussed. And the beginning of philosophy is talked about between these figures. So I made these paintings to be classical, yet permitting of feeling. And feelings, I think, are like weather, so they are not secure. And I painted them in the color of weather: twilight, dark, grey, mostly in greys, because feelings, human feelings, are mostly grey. This is a diptych. I can't remember how many we have in the exhibition, but it's the notion of a relationship made by two sides that reflect differently. So these paintings are divided generally down the middle, and one side is informing the other side, and they have a different weight, a different personality, and I try to make them in some way democratic, so that each side of the painting is as powerful or as delicate as the other. On this painting in particular, you can see how I allow a lot of emotion in the painting, and I don't close the spaces between the objects or between the blocks. That means I allow air to circulate between the blocks. This, of course, is subliminally political. Obviously, as a metaphor, it's a painting of how blocks come together, and the blocks are in a constant state of negotiation, as opposed to the way the world is actually made. This is a landline. In the landline paintings, I took out the vertical. And the vertical's always been very important to me, because it stands, in a sense, for the figure, or for a stick in the sand, or a building, but it basically stands for the human ego. I am standing. And the horizon line, of course, is what we live on. So my paintings have generally been made of horizon lines and columns, or standing figures. And that's why I've always used horizontals and verticals in a dialogue with each other, as if I'm building something, but always allowing the possibility of negotiation. This looks like, in a sense, a sea painting. a dark sea as an abstract painting. It's an abstract painting for sure, but it's coming very close to a dialogue with landscape painting. And if I were to put a little boat on there somewhere, it wouldn't look like an abstract painting anymore. It would look like a seascape. But it doesn't, because I keep the form absolutely monumental, essential. But again, you can see I'm allowing space between the blocks, always. And I'm making on this painting a reference to the ground, that it's painted on aluminum, which is an interesting material for me, because painting carries with it a great burden of history. You know, painting on canvas is 600 years old, I think. And actually, canvas was invented so that paintings could be rolled up and moved like carpets. And I was thinking about this, and also about when I was working as a printer, and the sentimentality of the canvas, what it signifies. And I find it very interesting to paint very romantically on a material that is in fact an element that you can dig up. And we also use it to fly around in. I mean, I was in one the other day in an aluminum tube coming to Korea. And what I like about aluminum is that it doesn't care. It doesn't care where you put it. You can put it up in the sky, you can put it in the water, it doesn't care. So it has something, some kind of indifference to us, whereas canvas is so sensitive and temperamental, and it's woven, and it's got all that history, and people adore it, of course. But here I'm making a great contrast between the way I paint, which is obviously very romantic, and how to make that credible in the contemporary world. And that's easier said than done. However, painting has made an incredible return. And I think I know why. I think it's because of inclusion. The gradual move towards artificiality, technology, and conceptualism is based on a reduction or a sense of analytical thinking, which has been white, male dominated. And once you say everybody can come to the party, the people that are invited to the party don't want to make refined conceptual art. They want to make painting, because painting is basic. The great thing about painting is that it can't be improved. Painting is almost as basic as eating. It was made in the caves. And it's been with us for many thousands of years. People argue about the date, but you can say it's 8,000 years if you want to. It's been with us for a very, very long time, and it's no different now to what it was in the beginning. It's just taking paint and putting it somewhere else, and that's it. You can't advance it technologically. So it provides sanctity for us, because we are being assaulted by artificiality. And when you make a painting, you reassert yourself as a physical, feeling human being. You're not interacting with technology at all, not at all. You see pictures of me painting. I don't do anything that cave painters didn't do. I do the same thing. And it's a reaffirmation. And the other thing I would say is this. If you look at old movies, they really look like old movies. And I can't watch them. I mean, if you want to watch a movie by, I don't know, Teshigahara, it's a Japanese filmmaker from the 60s, or Bergman, okay, you can do it, but you're not doing it for pleasure. So the advantages that technology brings very quickly become its disadvantages. Whereas painting, running, kissing, climbing, breathing, speaking don't evolve. They can't. And the security of the image on the wall is as powerful now as it ever was. And it's fascinating to me to see painting dominate contemporary art, because people were talking about the end of painting, and now nobody talks about the end of painting, except if they're in maybe a mental hospital. So this painting is made by spray gun. I only made one painting completely like this. I've used the spray gun a lot in my work, but I made one painting and I kept it. I think it's interesting. The line moves in a way that you can't make any other way. It moves a little bit like water. And in the cave paintings, there is a hand where somebody had sprayed. And obviously filled their mouth with paint, and I have a spray gun, but Spray painting was invented by cave painters. So again, there's not much evolution. I have a bip, but this is a triptych, and I don't usually make curves, but on this one I wanted to make something that felt like a dance, that imitated the movements of a dance, that jumped across the spaces between the panels. I'll just check the time. We don't want to be late, do we? Oh, we've only got 9 minutes. So, let's see what else we got here. Oh, okay. Now, I make abstract paintings, and I like making abstract paintings. People say that abstract paintings are difficult. For me, they were never difficult. And I made abstract paintings because I think I wanted to have a show in Korea when I was 17. And now look, I'm having a show in Korea and I'm not 17. But I basically wanted my work to be universal because I think of myself as somehow making a carpet around the world. I'm trying to stitch the world together and ameliorate the differences between people. I'm not very interested in the differences between people. And there are so many movies and books and paintings and discussions on the differences between people. And I'm very interested in the sameness of people. So I made work that tries to unify. I'm trying to stitch the world together. I mean, of course, I'm not a complete idiot. I know I can't do that. But this is what I'm attempting to do. Or as a friend of mine said, the work or the effort is its own reward, whether it's successful or not. So I'm trying to do something that I can't do, but I'm going to do it anyway. So I went to the beach a lot with my kid, and I took photographs. And I don't think photography is as good as painting. I just say that right out. And I had all these photographs in my phone, and I kept thinking about making them into paintings. Took a long time, thought about it for a long time. And then one day, I was in my studio in Manhattan, and I went out and I had lunch with a friend of mine, and I came back after having lunch and after having had a lot of wine at lunch, and I was feeling pretty jolly, and I thought, okay, today's the day. And I made the first figurative painting. And then, well, not the first figurative painting, but the first one celebrating my son on the beach. I made it very fast, and I held up the iPhone photograph, and I drew out the painting in 5 minutes, and then I just painted it in the way that I used to paint when I was younger. The ones that I showed you first, I just painted them the same way. And I hadn't made figurative paintings for decades, but I likened it to riding a bike. You know, if you have a bike in the garage and it's hanging on the wall, and you take it off the wall and you get on the bike, you can still ride the bike. It's all the information is in your head. It was interesting because it came very natural. And what people think of them, I don't know, and I don't really care. So this is a painting that was 2 paintings where I actually demonstrate the dilemma of removing pieces of information from the context. It seems very contemporary to me. It looks like almost like a travel painting where nothing is where it should be. And it's so strange, I find, when you get on an aeroplane and you watch movies about adventures at sea, let's say, an adventure at sea that takes place 200 years ago. And you're watching this film about the sea and about a big whale, maybe. And then towards the end of the movie, you feel a really big bump. And you're not in the sea, you're in the plane and it's landed. And you're in another country. And while watching this film about the sea that took place 200 years ago, it's so nuts, all this information that we have. And this is kind of similar because this painting is all wrong. It's all about being wrong. Everything's in the wrong place. So it doesn't know whether it's coming or whether it's going. It doesn't know whether it's abstract or whether it's figurative. This is a painting that just doesn't know. And that's exactly as it should be. I think this might be the last image. No, it's not. This is the problem of talking slow. And me, I'm an expert at talking slow. So this is San Giorgio Maggiore. And I was asked to do a big show there. You know, I do things in churches, but it's not because I'm observant, because I'm not. I could never be an observant Catholic, even though I feel religious, but I just can't, you know, I can't do what I'm told. I've never been able to do that. This is made of felt, which is a wonderful material, because felt is not made by lines. All other materials are made by line that I know. And felt is made by pressing. It's not woven. It's a very interesting material. It does wonderful things. This tower looks as if it's illuminated, but it's not. It takes all the light from the church to itself. it had an extraordinary effect on the space that I could not predict. I had no idea that this was going to happen. So I'm going to skip a couple of things. Those are COVID paintings. This is an answer to backs and fronts. So this one is called Fronts and Backs. It's a mirror made years later. And these, I think, in the exhibition look amazing. This is one of my absolute favorite rooms. These paintings are perhaps when I'm at my best as a colorist, showing a brilliant kind of color, but also always bound to the material, to the surface of the painting, taking into account the weight of the painting. And they are basically walls inserted into landlines. So I'm using my own history. You know, I made a big series called Wall of Light, which was inspired by Mexico. And then after that, I made a big series called Landline, where I took out the verticals. So these are really like paintings floating in landscapes. And I must say, I think the way they look in that room is better than I ever saw them anywhere in my life. So for me, it's incredible to see them like that. And all I can do is, oh, there she is, my little curator, thank you. So that's a picture of me. Perfect likeness. So I start sometimes making these paintings, little self-portraits, and it's just somebody who's thinking about what he's going to do, surrounded by what he does. I think the background is very important. And as you can see, it's painted in the same manner as my other figurative paintings. And this is not one of my paintings. This is a minimal artwork by somebody else. So, thank you very much.